Hey guys, today what I want to talk about is something that I hear my clients with insomnia say all the time, which is I'm exhausted. I am so tired. Why can't I sleep? Why am I unable to sleep, right? It doesn't make sense. And this is a very common thing that happens with insomnia is you might feel exhausted, fatigued, tired, and you want to sleep. It even feels like you're going to be able to sleep, and you get into bed and you don't sleep. You're alert, you're awake, and you're unable to fall asleep. And it could be very, very frustrating, and it could be very confusing because it doesn't make sense. It's like, how can I be exhausted and tired and fatigued and, only sleeping a few hours every night, or maybe not sleeping at all sometimes, and this has been going on for weeks, months, maybe longer, years, and I still I'm unable to get into the bed and fall asleep. What's going on here? And so this is this is like a common part of insomnia, is that you could be exhausted, but when you get into bed at night to go to sleep, you can't sleep. Or, you fall asleep if you have no trouble falling asleep, but then you wake up in the night and you can't get back to sleep, even though you've only slept a couple of hours, and you're still feeling exhausted, you're not unable to get back to sleep. So, I wanted to talk about this because this is something that confuses a lot of people, and pretty much every client that I have, it makes no sense to them. Sometimes this is referred to as wired and tired, meaning that, even though like you're not sleeping and you're only getting a few hours a night, you feel like this wired feeling, either at night when you get in the bed to sleep, or even during the day, you can feel this wired feeling. Now, this isn't true with everyone with insomnia. Usually it starts out that way, but sometimes people also can be totally calm. They're in the bed, they're not anxious, they're not worried, there's no wired feeling, they're totally calm, but they're still lying there awake, staring at the ceiling. And again, even more confusing when you're not anxious and like really alert and wired. So it could happen both ways. So I want to first explain today why this happens, why this is like a core part of insomnia that happens. And then also we'll give you an overview of how this is solved. So the first thing is that really what insomnia is at its core is the state of wakefulness. The state of being awake has been conditioned with the bed. Okay, conditioned, meaning that what happens is through different behaviors, what are called poor sleep behaviors, that lead to spending a lot of time in the bed awake and alert and not sleeping, and also maybe anxious and being wired and tossing and turning and ruminating in your mind. Once you've spent enough time in the bed awake and in that state, whether you're calm and awake or whether you're really anxious and your heart is beating and you're have really high anxiety and you're awake, is that state gets conditioned with the bed. It gets associated with the bed. And then what happens is your brain starts to associate those two things. When we're in the bed, we're awake, we're alert, we're wired, our mind is racing. Sometimes it's sleeping, because sometimes you are sleeping, and sometimes it's awake, and it's confused. But the more time that you spend in the bed awake, the more that becomes a stronger reaction or automatic response, and therefore it's a trigger. Okay? And so, basically why that happens is the brain is designed to create habits, right? Humans are habit-forming creatures, and that's kind of built into our physiology to help us, right? So then we can automatize things like tying our shoe or driving a car or cooking or a zillion other things, brushing our teeth, because we don't want to have to relearn that every time we're going to do those activities. We want to automatize them. We want them to be habits. We don't have to really think about them when we're doing them. It just happens, because then that frees up our minds to focus on other things, right? Otherwise, we're spending all our time like relearning all these sort of basic activities. And so our brains are designed to create habits to free up the space in our minds, so then we could focus on things that require more of our mental focus. And we don't have to think about these other things or think about them very much. And the problem is we can turn anything to a habit. We can turn really healthy, helpful behaviors into habits, or we could turn really unhealthy, even self-destructive behaviors into habits. Like, diet is one, exercise or doing drugs or things like that, right? You can, turn eating really badly into a habit. You can turn doing drugs or drinking alcohol in an unsafe way into a habit. You could turn anything into a habit, and that could be a healthy, helpful thing or not. So with insomnia, what happens is you develop a habit of not sleeping in the bed, or not sleeping in the bed sometimes. And to where that when you're in the bed, you're actually awake instead of sleeping or in a state for sleep. And obviously you don't want this. And obviously no one does this on purpose. Insomnia is like, it's a habit that's created unknowingly and, without intention. Usually when someone is actually trying to sleep better, the things that they try lead to the insomnia, create the insomnia, and then make it worse over time and then maintain it. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, but like it's these behaviors that lead to the poor sleep. And then when you're not sleeping well or you're awake in the bed, longer and longer over a longer period of time, that gets conditioned with the bed. So then even if you're exhausted, you're tired, you're fatigued, you feel like you could even sleep. Your body is screaming to sleep. You get into the bed to go to sleep at night, and all of a sudden you become awake. It's literally like, this is with people, this happens with people with onset insomnia, trouble initiating sleep. They get into bed and then their head hits the pillow and then they become alert. And it's bizarre, but it's because the brain knows you're in the bed now, and so it creates this state of wakefulness. But this can also happen with maintenance insomnia, where you fall asleep fine, but then you wake up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, and then your brain thinks, oh, it's the middle of the night. I need to wake up. I need to wake you up, because that's what you've been doing consistently for a while now. And it might even wake you up around the same time, because it develops a habit of, it knows that you've been waking up at a certain time and it thinks you want to, even though you don't. So this is one reason, the conditioning is one reason why this happens. And what you're really doing is you're conditioning yourself to be awake in the bed instead of asleep, because now you're spending a lot more time in the bed awake versus asleep, or maybe it's even 50-50. And what we want ideally is we want you to be 90% of the time you're in bed, you're sleeping, and only 10% of the time you're awake. With insomnia, it's usually 50-50 or 60-40. It's imbalanced, okay? The second thing that causes this is an inconsistent like sleep schedule or sleep pattern. So a couple of the poor sleep behaviors that create this conditioning to begin with are sleeping in and going to bed early. Okay? So what happens is you have a poor night of sleep and you didn't sleep well, you don't feel good, and you have the opportunity to sleep in. Let's say your regular wake up time is 6 a.m., but then 6 a.m. comes, your alarm goes off, you wake up, you feel like crap because you hardly slept, or you only slept a couple of hours, and you have the opportunity to sleep. Maybe it's a weekend. So this commonly happens on a weekend. Well, I don't have to be at work, so I can sleep in. Or maybe you're working from home, as a lot of people are doing, and you have a more, flexible work schedule. So you say, well, and you reset your alarm for 8 a.m. or you just turn off the alarm and you just allow yourself to sleep in a couple extra hours. Okay. Now that feels great because you get that extra sleep, you feel a little more recovered, but what you just did was you pushed your body clock ahead 2 hours. Now, why is that not a good thing to do when you have insomnia? Well, it means that when you go to sleep the next night, when you get into bed around your bedtime, okay, let's say your normal bedtime is 10 p.m., you might still feel exhausted and tired because you still haven't been sleeping that well over the past several weeks, months, right? But when you get into bed, you're not tired at all, right? Because you haven't been up as long. You got up 2 hours later, but you're getting in bed around the same time, and therefore it's 2 hours less that you've been awake during the day, and that's 2 hours less to build up what's called sleep pressure. And sleep pressure is really one of the key things that causes us to sleep. And, there's a whole physiology around what creates sleep pressure, but it's based on how much time you've actually been awake during the day. The less time you've been awake, the less sleep pressure, the harder it is to sleep. So when you sleep in, you push your body clock forward because now instead of being able to fall asleep at 10, you probably won't be able to fall asleep till midnight. And then if you keep doing that, you keep pushing the body clock. But what happens is it'll be inconsistent because then the next night you might not sleep in, or the next night you might sleep in, or next day you might sleep in an extra hour, and you're getting up at different times. But then you might also be trying to go to bed earlier. So your brain is confused because it doesn't know like what time you are going to sleep and what time you're waking up because you keep changing those things, right? And you're doing it to try to help yourself get some more sleep. But what it ends up doing is it messes up a normal sort of sleep rhythm or pattern of going to bed around a certain time and waking up at a certain time. That can be set as a habit. Right? You're switching it around. And that's another thing that adds to this, right? Because that then leads to you getting in bed and not being able to sleep because you don't have that pressure. So then you're lying there awake and then you're tossing and turning and you don't know what to do. And then the more that happens, the more that gets conditioned with the bed and the more the insomnia, gets set into place. Another thing that creates that is taking naps during the day. So if you, again, have a poor night of sleep and you have the opportunity and you're able to sleep during the day, like you're able to nap, then you might take an hour or 2 hour nap. Feels great. But then when it comes to going to bed that night, again, not as much sleep pressure and your body's confused about when you want to sleep, when you don't want to sleep, you get into bed and you're awake. So poor sleep behaviors, sleeping in, going to bed early to try to make up for lost sleep, taking long naps during the day, whatever it is. Those are 3 common poor sleep behaviors that then make it hard for you to sleep during the night, either fall asleep, stay asleep, or both. And then because then you're lying in bed longer awake, attempting to go back to sleep or doing who knows what, that gets conditioned with the bed over and over again. And then it creates insomnia. So this is that conditioning, and the conditioning that's caused by the poor sleep behaviors is what creates this pattern. Okay? So that hopefully gives you at least a good idea of why this is happening and how this makes sense, that you could be exhausted, you could be tired, you could be fatigued, and still get in the bed and not sleep. Because essentially, unknowingly you trained your body to not be able to sleep at night, or at least part of the night when you're in the bed. Okay, so how do you stop this? How do you break this pattern of wakefulness in the bed when you want sleepiness in the bed? Well, what we do is we just reverse what caused it to begin with, right? Meaning that, number one, if you're spending a lot of time in the bed awake, we want to reduce that. We want to minimize the amount of time that you're spending in the bed awake and maximize the time that you're sleeping. We need to make your sleep more efficient. This is called sleep efficiency. So as I said, we want to get your efficiency to about 90%. Whereas when you have insomnia, your sleep efficiency is anywhere from like 50 to 75%. And it's going to vary night to night. It's not going to be exact, but it's going to be in that range. And we want it 90%. Because if it's below 90% or below 85%, really, then that starts creating that conditioning of being more awake in the bed than asleep. Okay, so again, we need to minimize the time you're in bed awake and maximize the time you're in bed sleeping. And that's one key sort of behavior shift that we create. We create a structure and a schedule around your sleep. But to make this work effectively, it has to be one that fits with your current pattern of sleep. So the way this is done incorrectly, and I'll have a whole nother video on this aspect of insomnia or overcoming insomnia, because it's usually done incorrectly or it's misunderstood or it's mislabeled. But essentially, like, to create a sleep schedule that will work for you when you have insomnia, you can't just create the schedule that you had before you had insomnia, because you're not able to sleep 7-8 hours or more now. You're sleeping less. And you can't create a sleep schedule that is like, someone else that has insomnia, because their pattern of insomnia is different. Everybody's pattern of insomnia is different. Some people have onset insomnia, trouble falling asleep. Some have maintenance insomnia, some trouble staying asleep. Some people have early awakening, where they're waking up really early and they don't go back to sleep at all. Some people have a combination of all these things. And then even within those things, how long is it actually taking you to fall asleep or fall back to sleep? How often is it happening? Are you taking medication? There's a lot of different variables with insomnia that can be different for each person, and therefore everybody's insomnia has a unique pattern. And to make the sleep schedule work for you, it has to fit your pattern like a glove, and it has to fit your pattern in the way that it's been over the last 7 days. So you see how specific and personalized it has to be for it to be effective. And then once you create it, every week you need to adjust it, because your sleep is going to change. It's going to progress. And therefore we need to adjust that schedule based on that progression and based on some really key numbers. So this is too detailed to go into in this video, but that is one really key component to essentially making your sleep more efficient and trying to maximize the time you're in bed asleep, minimize the time you're in bed awake. And when you do that, it starts to strengthen the sleep system. It starts to decondition the wakefulness and recondition and reestablish a conditioning of, when I'm in the bed, I'm sleeping, right? Okay, so that's the other one. The other one is we need to remove those poor sleep behaviors, right? So you stop doing those, and we add some key healthy sleep behaviors. Basically, behaviors that naturally lead to good sleep, that don't interfere with good sleep, right? That you were doing at some point, when you had, or if you had a normal pattern of sleep at one point. You were doing these, but you weren't conscious of what you were doing, okay? And then the last thing is, we need to, when you're not sleeping, even within that structure, right? Let's say we created a sleep schedule that fits with your pattern, but then let's say you're still not sleeping somewhere in that range, in that time you're supposed to be in bed. What do? How do you respond to that effectively, so it doesn't keep feeding the insomnia, so it doesn't, perpetuate the problem, and it can start to break that pattern. So that's another sort of behavior shift that you need to learn how to do. So there's basically these, like 4 or 5 different key components to the treatment process for overcoming insomnia. And these essentially remove the poor sleep behaviors that created the insomnia and the wakefulness, deconditions or breaks the conditioning of wakefulness in the bed and conditions sleepiness in the bed, and that it's fit to your exact pattern of insomnia and sleep and all the different variables involved in that, week by week as you're progressing through this process, until the old pattern is broken, the old pattern of insomnia is broken, and the new pattern is established, or really reestablished, right? You don't lose your ability to sleep. We're just bringing it back out. And that's kind of how it works. And then once that happens, once you're spending more time in bed sleeping and less time awake, now your brain is, oh, this is what you want to do. You want to be sleeping here and not being awake. And it starts to condition that and make that an automatic response. Just like maybe you used to sleep, or maybe you never slept that well, but I'm sure there's people maybe it's a partner, where they get into bed and they're out and they sleep. Okay, that's because the bed is a very strong cue for them to sleep, because the associations for them are, most of the time they're in bed sleeping and they're sleeping well and they're not awake, and etc. Okay, so that's essentially what we're doing when we're helping someone overcome insomnia, is we're going through that process. And you can see this is like 95% behavioral. There is a mental part of it, a thought part of it, but it's 95% behavioral, because that is how the insomnia was created to begin with. And that's how we need to undo it as well, is changing the behaviors, removing the bad ones, adding in the good ones, and just reestablishing that healthy pattern of sleep. All right, so I hope this was helpful for you to get a better understanding of something that's kind of baffling and confusing for a lot of people when they have insomnia. Is this, I'm exhausted, why can't I sleep sort of question. And that there's nothing wrong with you, like people think, oh, there's something wrong with me, that I've lost my ability to sleep. No, that's not what's going on. It's what I explained in the video is what's going on. So if you want, more details, and you want more resources for learning about this and how you can overcome insomnia, you can just go to my website. If you're watching this on my website, there's other videos that you can watch where I go over different aspects of insomnia. And there's also a free training that I offer that you can register for through my website and watch that. And that training goes into even more detail about the problems that create insomnia, and then kind of the 5 key steps to overcoming insomnia and being able to get your sleep back and be able to maintain that for life. So you just go to my website, that's drorma.com, drorma.com, and you can check out all the resources there and learn a lot more about how you can get past this problem. All right, if you liked the video, please click like. If you're on YouTube, if you have any questions or comments, you can just leave them below. And otherwise, I'll see you next time.